So, in addition to finches, the Galapagos Islands are also home to two different species of iguana, the Galapagos land iguana and the marine iguana. In fact, there has been a third species recently discovered, but we'll overlook that one for now. The marine iguana is interesting. It's the only iguana species in the world that seems to regularly feed underwater. So these iguanas, while they will bask in the sun on rocks near the shore, they will dive into the water and go underwater and eat algae on the bottoms of the shallow oceans there. And they have special adaptations for this way of life. They have very long claws, so they can grip onto the ocean floor. They have a they have a flatter tail, which allows them to propel themselves underwater. So they're pretty good swimmers. They can hold their breath for fairly long times, so they can feed while they're down there. They excrete salt out their nostrils, any salt that does get into the body from the ocean water. So they've got several adaptations that the land iguanas don't have. And so here we would see, again, an example of how some founding member, some species of South American iguana is going to evolve into two separate species. Now, why do we think they came from South America? Well, again, fitting this pattern, both of the species, the land and the marine iguana, are most similar to South American iguana species as opposed to iguanas elsewhere in the world. Now, so how might this have happened? How do you get iguanas from South America out to the islands? Well, biologists argue that it requires an ocean journey. Now, they didn't swim out there. More likely, they hitched a ride on vegetation. In fact, when Darwin was sailing around the world, he would often see piles of floating vegetation and debris and leaves and twigs and sticks and tree trunks and so on floating out in the ocean. And on that debris, on that vegetation, animals can hitch a ride. So the idea is maybe a storm, washes out some debris from the land, and some iguanas are hitching a ride, and they get lucky. They make that couple 100-mile ocean journey, and they end up on an island that already has plants, so there's a food source. The land iguanas are vegetarians, and so they would make use of the new food source. Of course, if this had happened multiple times, there's no doubt many iguanas would have perished in the journey. But some evidently got lucky, colonized the islands. Now, as they reproduce on the islands, of course, and now there's going to be food competition, right? Population pressure. And so any individual that can make use of a new food source would have an advantage. So here we see again the power of natural selection. Natural selection will favor any new variation that allows some old iguana, right, to make use of a new food source, like the algae underneath the water. And so then we can imagine, again, here's this pattern, some individuals of the species moving into a new way of life or a new environment, and others of that same species staying in the old environment. And this is the recipe for making new species. In time, as natural selection equips the species with new adaptations like the claws and the flat tail, etc., they may become so genetically distinct that they no longer mate with the land iguanas. In fact, there are known examples of hybrids, so occasionally there will be a hybrid mating, right? A marine iguana with a land iguana. But for the most part, they don't mate in nature, and so we identify them as separate species. Now, we can use our diagram to help us understand, again, the process of natural selection causing iguana populations to evolve. So we can imagine the ancestral claw looked like this. This would have been the claw on the iguana that first colonized the Galapagos Islands. Of course, reproduction produces variation in the claw sizes and shapes and so on. And with the new way of life, trying to get food underneath the water, right, the algae, well, that's a new selection pressure. So the ocean environment is going to be favoring certain claw variations over others. And over time, then, we get the evolution of claws that are better suited to the new feeding way of life underneath the water. Again, just more detail this time, right? In each generation, there's variation, and in each generation, the differences make a difference to survival, right? Now, keep in mind this variation is random. Most of the offspring inherit the parental claw type, but there's some claws that are better suited to the environment, some worse suited. And those, of course, will tend to lose the struggle for existence. And we identify these as the failed experiments. Well, that leaves those individuals with useful variations to make babies and pass on those traits. Why are these claws better? Better for holding on to the rocks underwater, strong currents there so they can maintain their feeding position. Same type of thing with the tail. The ancestral species had a kind of a cone-shaped tail. The Galapagos marine iguanas have a flatter tail, and that's better for swimming. And again, we can imagine variation over time with selection of the favored trait. And those individuals will have more babies, and so the trait will become more common in the future, and it can be improved because of heredity. Each generation, the trait is preserved with some improvements and sometimes not, but the fact that the trait is heritable means that it can be improved over time.